start this and see. So today's first little thing, I ran across this. The Sabbath is abolished by Jesus Christ. And a beautiful picture of Moses throwing the Ten Commandments down. And Jesus is, you can't really see it. I haven't figured out how to make them the right size yet. That's Jesus on the left, of course, and that's Moses. So that's the thing. The Sabbath was abolished by Jesus Christ. And that's the way a lot of people think. And so I went on their website, and they're the Church of Christ, and they have, like most denominations, they have a lot of pretty good, right on the money stuff, and then they have some, it's like, how did you get there? You know? And that's what caught my eye. But most Christians probably think something like that. You know, that if you ask them that, if you showed them that picture and said, is this true, they would probably say no. But they're kind of straddling the fence. Most Christians probably are not clear on that topic. So I wanted to use that, and then there's the proper one, the Shabbat Shalom. So yeah, the Sabbath, and I sent you the Shabbat Sabbath thing. You know, as far as I can determine, it's almost interchangeable. But when you have a Shabbat, a lot of Shabbats are not on Sabbath, but all Sabbaths are on Saturday. So okay, so this is apparently the fourth week of this, living in the days of redemption, and you shall know that I'm the Lord. We started sort of with John 17:3, and this is eternal life, that they might know Yahweh, the only true God, and Yeshua HaMashiach, who he has sent. And then we talked about Paul in 1 Corinthians spoke clearly that the last generation, and if you believe this is the last generation, or that is the last generation, the Exodus generation is what he told us to look to and to learn from and to not make those mistakes. He said that generation is a die stamp, and I used a picture of, you know, making a fender. Every fender is interchangeable, and of course in those days, when you shipped something or had something important or worthwhile, you had a ring, a signet ring that was carved, you know, in whatever, and you sealed it in wax, and nobody else would have that same. But every seal you do is exactly the same, and that's the word, you know, that they were using. So he goes on to say those that think they're following the lessons of the Exodus generation, you know, know these, take heed lest you fall, because it's important that you do know these things. Exodus chapter 20 is where we started last week, and you know, we learned a lot about the Exodus generation. One of those was that they were complainers, and Ezekiel adds that maybe 15 times that they polluted the Sabbath. And he said the Sabbath is a sign between them and me, that they might know me. So I got a wild hair and looked up that word polluted. It's kalal, and in my little ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible, or some such as that, kalal is a pretty cool word. It has 3 full pages of definitions. And these are some that you would read in the King James, I assume similar in different versions. This word kalal that we've read as polluted a number of times is also translated as defile, begin, profane, prostitute, wounded, sorrow, grapes, and the story, you know, I think grapes, what the heck's with the grapes? You read the whole verse, and it's a man marries a wife, but another man lays with her, and that produces this field of grapes that isn't right. So that's when it says grapes, piped with pipes. And the context of the verse is these people were singing and raising music to the defeat of the Lord. So it's the same word translated as polluted. Formed of a crooked serpent, broke his covenant, to stain the pride of all glory, to stain the pride of his glory. Inheritance, but it's the inheritance of the heathen. slain the uncircumcised by the sword, and others like that. It's translated a whole bunch of different ways. It's that same Hebrew word. And, you start reading all the words that in the context, you have to read the contexts too, and you see that this word is, it's clearly anything that's against the Lord. It's a bad thing. But I wanted to read those because this is the issue that people who translate Hebrew come up against. It's one word, and you have to translate it in all of these different contexts and all of these different verses into another language. And so you wind up with this litany of words that, if you just take the words, look at a list of the words, you'd think, oh, some of these are good and some of those are bad. So you look at the context, and in each context, it's very bad. You marry a wife and someone else lays with her. I mean, that's polluted. That's this idea. But that's what anybody who translates Hebrew has to deal with. Because Hebrew has maybe one word, and we, like I say, the English dictionary is that thick. We have 100 words for every single little, context and so anyway, I thought it was an interesting word for those reasons. We read in Ezekiel of the children's continued rebellion against the Lord. They certainly, the parents were taken out of Egypt miraculously, saw the Red Sea split, saw the Pharaoh's army drowned, received, bread from the skies and water from the rocks. Their clothes didn't wear out. They're in the desert and had cloud cover to keep them warm every day, or cold, and had a fire to keep them warm every night. It was a miraculous thing. And then you go to the 42 different camps that they went to, and all of those have great meaning and great lessons, and they learned, they should have learned about God in a new way, because they had not experienced, no one had experienced any of that previous. The Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob generation, they knew of him, they knew these things were promised, this redemption was promised, but they never lived to see it. So these people actually saw it, and yet they wouldn't follow him. He kept saying, well, do this, do that, let's keep the Sabbath, let's keep the feast, let's keep the circumcision, let's, do all this stuff, and they would not. And they all perished in the wilderness. So the children of those people presumably had heard and seen the same things, and they continued to refuse to follow the Torah of the Lord. They did what they wanted to do, and we learned a little bit about passing their children through the fire, their version of abortion, their pollution of the Sabbath, worship of other gods, their complaining. And Paul told them, and by default told us, to take heed lest you fall. So we ended last week in Ezekiel 20, around 24, I don't remember where we were. But the people of the Lord had come to him to inquire of the Lord. And they were currently in the penalty box for 70 years because they had not done what the Lord had asked them to do. And so he said, I will not be inquired of you people. If you will not listen to me and do what I ask you to do, I'm not going to listen to you and be inquired of by you. So he said to them, I know what's on your mind. I know what you're going to ask me, and you want to be like the other nations. And he said, I will never let that happen. And again, the reason that he doesn't let that happen is for his name. It's not so much for you. If we want to live like the nations, for the most part, he will let us live like the nations and reap the consequences. But for this group of people, and I would suggest that's, he selected the Hebrews, not because they were awesome or spiritual or any more godly than the next group. He selected them. That's his team, and they're going to do what he asks them to do. And that's what he said. I will not let you guys act like the nations. It's just not going to happen. So he said he uses the same term, the outstretched arm, the wrath of God, the mighty hand. He uses that same phrase and term, whether he's saving his people from whatever the issue was, or whether he's bringing his people along with him. So we read about that in Matthew. We read about the people who said, "Oh, but we've done all these wonderful things, prophesied and raised the dead and done all this stuff in your name." And he said, "But I never knew you. Depart from me, workers of iniquity." And that word is, a nomos, without law, without the Torah. Those people who don't have the Torah, he says, it doesn't matter what you do in my name. If you don't have the Torah, I didn't know you. And that was, that was these people. And this term repeats and repeats and repeats. Mighty hand, outstretched arm, outpoured wrath. And it's interesting that that's how he brought the people out of Egypt, and that's how he brings the people to him. And it doesn't say he's going to rule over his people with rainbows and unicorns and butterflies. And that's kind of the message you often get at church on Sunday is God is love. Well, God is love. There's no question. But he's more than that. And you tend to want to think after a number of Sunday sermons that he's going to draw people to himself, with the rainbows and unicorns and butterflies. And the reality is people will not come to him that way. Some will, but most won't. And he has a specific group of people that he wants to do a specific work with so that the rest of the world will see that he is the Lord. And that's the whole purpose of certainly the Exodus generation of Ezekiel 38, 39, the end times, all this stuff. These things are always so that they will know that I am the Lord. They will have an intimate relationship with me and be saved. And he has to do these things so that people will know. And he started with his people in Egypt, his people, his children were in Egypt, and he taught them this way, with a mighty hand and outstretched arm and outpoured wrath. And he sent the first 3 plagues on them as well as on the Egyptians, so that they would know that he is the Lord. Now they knew about him. They apparently didn't know him intimately. So after these first 3 events, 4, I guess if you count the whole Moses deal, that was a miracle in and of itself, that Moses survived, that Moses was raised in the Pharaoh's house, that, he knew that he had a calling, and it didn't go the way he thought it would go. So he spent 40 years being a Jew in the house of the Pharaoh, 40 years living out with Jethro in the wilderness, wondering what went wrong, and then 40 years leading the people. And it is always this mighty hand, outstretched arm, and outpoured wrath. And it would be so much simpler if we would just buy into what he was selling. He says, hey, if you live like this, then that will cause you to think the way I would like you to think. Then you will be one of my children, or you will know me intimately. It's his desire that everyone know him intimately and be saved. And of course we recognize that that's not going to happen. But it would be so much better, so much easier, our lives would be so much more fulfilling, I would think, if we just did the things that he asked him to do, or ask us to do. And there's a number of things, we always pick out a few. Why don't we worship on the Sabbath? And if you read those things, the Wikipedia thing that I sent you, 5 or 6 different catechisms that explained why we don't worship on Saturday anymore. So, and the reasoning was unbelievably lame in my opinion, but the thing that I wanted you to see was None of them said, "Oh, well, it was always Sunday." They all recognized that the Lord asked us to worship on Saturday, but they wanted to change it. And that's the question. Well, how can the church change it? And the answer is always, well, the fact that the church changed it is proof that the church could change it. That's circular reasoning to the max. But they recognize there is no reason. There's no reason why we messed up all the feasts. There's no reason. Well, there is a reason for all this stuff, and that reason is the enemy. Anything that opposes the things of the Lord will seek to change, and that's what Daniel says. The enemy will seek to change the times and the seasons. He will seek to change the way that we live our lives, because the Lord said, let's do it this way. I'll be there on this day, and the world will say, no, we don't want to do that. Let's do it our way. And all of that is living like the nations, and everybody from the get-go from the garden has desired to live like the nations rather than follow the Lord. And it remains a mystery to me how so many seem to fall for that, but most do. And he says, I will bring them out with the outstretched arm, the mighty hand, and his wrath, outpoured wrath. So I think we're going to pick this up in 34 of Ezekiel. Is that right? Yes. So again, this is just continuing the chapter of that we started. 34 says, I will bring you from the nations and gather you from the countries where you have been scattered with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm and outpoured wrath. And again, this is the same way that he brought them out of the bondage of Egypt. This is the same way he brings them into his camp, if you will. He's going to bring them from the world, the countries, the places they've been scattered. And we talked about this last week. The Jews have been scattered to every country in the world. And that's no accident, right? That was God's plan, was to get his people. He picked one little microscopic group of people, and through those people, he was going to share his message with the entire world. Well, you know what people typically do. They're not comfortable going out and doing stuff, so the Lord has to kick them out to do it. And he did. And he did it in the same way he saved them from Egypt and everything else, the outstretched arm, the mighty hand, the outpoured wrath. Okay, 35 is, I will bring you into the wilderness of the nations, and there face to face I will execute judgment upon you. As I judged your ancestors in the wilderness in the land of Egypt, so I will judge you, declares the sovereign Lord. Now think about this. When has there been another time in Scripture anywhere that you can remember that Yahweh appeared face to face with? There aren't any. It's happened one time. It happened with Moses on the mountain, with this Exodus generation. And he says, Paul would have you to believe anyway, that he will do this one more time. He will appear face to face with the last generation in order to accomplish his goals. And I can't tell you what that will look like. Or, is it going to be one guy up on the mountain again, or is he going to appear, who knows? I don't know. But if you tend to think that the Bible is true, and Ezekiel says this about that generation, and Paul says that generation is to be our die stamp, then the case can be made that he will appear somehow, somewhere, in some way, if we're the last generation to us. And is it to each of us individually? I don't know, maybe. That would be kind of cool, kind of frightening. Is it in some way like the Exodus, where he'll appear to the equivalent of Moses, who will, I don't know. But what I'm saying is, as I read it, literally, that's what it says will happen. And I know if that will blow people's minds. And there will be a lot of Christians, or people who call themselves Christians, who will, you can cite all kinds of verses that will say, oh, no, that's not him. Well, how are you going to know? or are you going to be deceived? Because we'll read later that, many Christs will come, many fake messiahs will come. So how do you know? How are you going to be able to tell if this guy appearing face to face is Yahweh or if it's a pretender? And I suspect it's the same way that you know a counterfeit $100 bill. You have to look at them. The only way you can put them in all these machines, bless you, and do all this stuff and use all those fancy pins. And
like knowing the signs, like when they start to build the temple in Jerusalem again.
Yeah, exactly. You should know what to expect. And that basically is the entire purpose of why we're doing this, is to bless you.
I do 37.
Okay. Well, bless you for the third one, and let's go. Okay, the 37, the next verse.
That says, as I judged your ancestors, though. So does that not mean it's just the Hebrews and the Jewish people?
Well, but Paul said that group of people whom the Lord appeared face to face is the same. We will experience the same things that they experienced. And we should use everything that happened to them as a lesson for us. So, and again, you won't know until it happens. But my guess is that happened to them. Paul said it's going to happen to us. I can't tell you how or what it's going to look like or when, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it. I mean, I would be surprised if Yahweh himself appeared in my living room, and, that would totally blow my mind. But looking at this, I wouldn't not expect it. So, and that, again, is the purpose of this. I'm no foreteller of the future. I don't know, it's not like the Lord speaks to me every night and then I come talk to you. I'm going through this like you're going through this. The way I kind of understand it is, don't be surprised if that happens. Don't be blown away and think, oh, that's not God. Use a little discernment, because there will be many that will come who will say they're God. So how will you know? You have to know God. And that's the secondary title of this, and you shall know, right? The purpose is we need to have that intimate relationship with the Lord so that we can discern whether it's him or a pretender. I guess. I mean, I don't know. Like I say, I'm just throwing this out there. But 37 says, and I will take note of you as you pass under my rod. I mean, he will look at each of us. And I will bring you into the bond of the covenant. And again, that's classic Old Testament, if you want to say it that way, language. The covenant is between him and Abraham, our fathers. There's a number of covenants. And this is the important part. And I will purge you of those who revolt and rebel against me. Although I will bring them out of the land where they are living, yet they will not enter the land of Israel. And then you will know that I am God. And that, again, to me, is there are so many people who believe themselves to be saved. There were millions of people who he brought out of Egypt. And you could easily say, if you're one of those people complaining the whole time, he brought me out of Egypt, he brought me out of bondage, heading towards the promised land, I must be good to go, right? I must be saved. Look what he's done for me so far. And we all look at our lives and say, oh, the Lord has done this or hasn't done that, or we can all cite all these experiences that the Lord has worked on our behalf, or he's made himself known to us, or whatever. And then I bring you back to those who said, but we prophesied in your name, we healed the sick in your name, we did all these things, and he never knew you. So there's obviously you have to be realistic that there's a couple of things you need to consider. Just because you're working for him or he's done things for you is no guarantee that you know him unto salvation. You may know of him, you may work for him, he may bring you out of bondage, he may do miracles, splitting the sea, bringing food from heaven, he may do all of these things for you, that does not mean you're saved. If entering the promised land, entering Israel, is the picture of your salvation, you have to know the Lord intimately. And again, he says, take heed. I will purge the rebels from among you. Well, looking back on this Exodus generation, he brought how many millions of people out with his outstretched arm, mighty hand, and outpoured wrath. I mean, he decimated Egypt, which is the world. He destroyed all of their false gods. He provided all of these miracles, and yet they rebelled against him. They would not keep his Sabbaths. They would not keep his circumcision. They would not keep his festivals. They would not do the things he asked them to do. They did what they wanted to do. But they were in his good graces, if you will. He did not kill them. He said, I won't kill you for my name's sake, even though, you kind of deserve it. I will continue to provide miracle after miracle after miracle for you. I will continue to call you my children, even though they were not. And when it gets right up to the point where they need to enter the promised land, most of them didn't go. They fell in the wilderness. So again, that's just, the frightening reality that I have for you. Because I'm not the rainbows and unicorns and butterfly guy. That's the Sunday guys. The frightening reality is that none of those things are equivalent of salvation. They are awesome, and he is God, and he can do those things, and he's happy to do those things, but we need to respond in an appropriate manner. And most of them did not. So if you remember, he was also talking, he talked about the religious leaders who, of course, all thought they were saved, because they did all their tithes and all their work at church and all their good stuff. And he said, absolutely, you need to do those things, but do not neglect the weightier matters of the Torah, he calls it, that of justice and mercy and faith and the other things. We need to treat people in the way that the Lord would have us treat them, in the way that he treated us. And how did he treat us? Well, while we were in rebellion,
Mercy, mercy, mercy.
mercy, mercy, mercy. He provided us food and protection and cool in the heat of the day and heat in the cool of the evening, and the clothes never wore out. And he continued to provide that even though we were in rebellion. So don't think that him continuing to bless us or, is a sign that you're saved, because it's not. The only way you can be saved is where we started in John 17, is to know the Lord. Okay. So, that's my admonishment. Don't be like these people. They happily accepted all the gifts of the Lord and all the bounty he had and all the miracles he provided. And yet, even people like us, or people, maybe I shouldn't say people like us, people who don't know the Lord, people who don't go to church, when they receive a gift, they give something back. It's just, you do. At the very least, you thank them, you acknowledge the giver, but typically if we're given a gift, especially at holidays or birthdays or something, we will give that person back a gift, right? We respond in kind. And it just seems weird that we don't do that with the Lord. Of all the people in the universe, the one guy that we don't respond in kind to is the one guy that we should. Right? Because I can return the gift to my sister, my wife, which I rarely do. I'm a lousy gift giver. My father, whoever gives me something, I will give them something back. But I'm not so good at that with the things of the Lord, and that's just ridiculous. I mean, lay that out on the table. There is no more stupid position than that. Who cares if I return the gift to my sister, or my father, or my neighbor? I should be returning the gift to the Lord, because that's the one that matters. But we want to live like the world. We do not want to have to live under the rules of the Lord. And the rules of the Lord are not burdensome. They're light. They remove the burdens from us. But there's just something about us that we don't seem to do that. But he does all of these things for the one reason, so that you will know that I am the Lord. And the hope is eventually we will come to that knowledge. And I looked at the synagogue murders this weekend, and no one there was under 54 to 97 or something. Those people had ample opportunity to know that he is the Lord. None of the young people died. They perhaps didn't know him yet. And that, I do not believe that is anything like an accident. Okay, the day will come, though, and this, I'm always big on this. There will be a point in time. For the last 6,000 years, that point in time has been out there somewhere. Well, we'll never live to see it, or we haven't lived to see it, or no generation has lived to see it. And I've heard this argument so many times. Well, people have thought that for thousands of years and it hasn't happened. Why do you think it's going to happen to you? Really? Do you want to know why? Let's sit down. You have 6 or 8 hours. I'll tell you why I think it's going to happen to me. But it is going to happen. There will be a point in time at which the Lord says, that's it. It's done. It's over. We're going to the next step. And if you miss the boat, you miss the boat. Too bad, so
We want to be in
sad.
the right place, even if we're not the last generation. We want to be in the right place and teach our kids right,
Exactly.
so that they can be
Exactly.
in the right place.
And that's the thing is, I have no special knowledge to know that we're the last generation. I can't sit down for 6 hours and tell you why I think we're going to be the next. But, what does it matter what I think, right? It matters what the Lord thinks. But there will come a point in time in which, as Isaiah 45:23 says, that unto me every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. And Isaiah said it first. Paul repeated it later in Romans. There will come a time at which every knee will bow. Every knee will bow. The pharaohs, the Muslims, the murderers, whoever, the Christians, the Jews, the people who follow the Lord, the people who don't. They will all stand before the Lord, and every knee will bow. Every tongue will confess. And at that point, you do not want to be the one who didn't believe. You do not want to be the one who didn't know who the Lord was. You do not want to be one of those rebels. You don't want to be, I'm sure none of you are Buddhists or Hindus or even Methodists, You want to know who the Lord is, because that time will come when every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, and it will be too late if you haven't already done that. And we talked about him being long-suffering and how his scales seem to be, if you break the math down, 250 to 1 towards mercy. But that doesn't mean it's infinitely towards mercy. You can run that out. And he said it a number of times. I don't want you to kill those Amalekites yet, because their time has not yet come. They have not run out the clock. They will. Eventually their iniquity will be so bad it will tip the scales that were 250 to 1 the other way, and that's it. They're done. But until that time, he doesn't let you, doesn't let us deal with them. And that, in a weird way, is like I've been talking about, Columbine and all the way up to this weekend. I just don't see anyone ever being lost that hadn't made a decision yet. Everyone who's, as far as I can tell, been lost has already made a decision, either for or against him, and most for. Most of those people followed the Lord. And it was okay. It's never okay, but it was okay in the eternal sense because nothing was lost. Or there were some that were never, That's where we are. Okay, so in light of all of these things that will be happening, the Exodus generation and stuff, I don't want you to miss this stuff, which is what we more commonly know. In Luke 21:25 it starts, and it says, talking about the end times, he said there will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and on the earth distress of nations with perplexity. And that's an interesting phrase. The sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them from fear and the expectation of the things which are coming on earth, for the powers of heaven will be shaken. They will see the Son of Man coming in the cloud with power and great glory, as we used to say, or great glory. And when these things begin to happen, look up, lift your heads, because your redemption draws near. So these things begin to happen. We kind of sometimes tend to think, oh, I'm going to see all this stuff going on in the world, I'm going to see all of these things happening, and then I will know. Well, he's saying when you start to see these things, look up, because your redemption is near. When these things begin to happen, it's not after they have happened. It's not, well, I'll wait and see. It's when they begin to happen. And I suspect one reason for that is probably throughout most generations, at least in the last 2,000 years, probably in the last 4,000 years, you can see some of these things happening, and you would, obviously there was no, New Testament writers back then, but you can see and you start to think, oh my gosh, the end is near. And I've read, I can't tell you how many commentators from, 2,000 years before Jesus till the early 1900s that were, oh my gosh, all these things are happening. It must be here soon. It must be here soon. And there was always a number of things that they didn't include. And Clarence Larkin is one of those cool guys who, if you know him, he's famous. He, instead of writing books, he would draw pictures. He would make these graphs and these charts, and they're just beautiful. And he lived in the early 1900s, up to 1930, I think. And he's talking about the end times, and it's okay, well, this has happened, and that's happened. And he'd get to the part where Israel is returned to a nation, and there'd be a big question mark, because that hadn't happened yet. But he knew it had to happen, right? And that's the same kind of attitude Daniel had. It's like, well, he said 70 years. It's been, 69 years, 364 days, and it's got to be like tomorrow, right? So if you know and watch and understand, Joseph is the same way. The Lord gave him all these visions, and he went out and told everybody, and everybody thought he was an idiot, until they all came to pass, right? You have to know the things of the Lord. And so Luke says these things and reminds us that these, when these begin to happen, look up. So if we went back in Luke 21 up a few verses, it says, and take heed that you not be deceived, for many will come in my name, saying, I am he. The time has drawn near, therefore do not go after them. And that's what I'm talking about. The Lord on one hand says, I will come to you face to face. And then we get the admonishment that many will come and say they are the Lord. So how would you know? And I submit to you, the only way to know is to know what he said, to know all of these things that he asked us to watch for, to not be fooled by the counterfeit $100 bill, to know the real deal. And that takes effort and time. You have to understand these things. Okay, verse 9. So when you hear of wars and commotions, do not be terrified, for these things must come to pass first, but the end will not come immediately. And then he said to them, nation, and that word is ethnos, so it's actually, you could easily read this. And he said to them, and again, pertaining to what you will see at the end times, ethnic group will rise against ethnic group. And kingdom is a word for royalty, or perhaps celebrity, or perhaps politicians, because we don't have royalty anymore, we have politicians. So if you see ethnic group rise against ethnic group, and politicians against politicians, okay, there's a good sign. You'll see great earthquakes in various places, and famines and pestilence, and there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. But before all these things, they will lay hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and to prison. And you will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. But it will turn out to you as an occasion for testimony. Therefore, and this is important, therefore settle it in your hearts not to meditate beforehand on what you will answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries will not be able to contradict or resist. You will be betrayed by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death, like I suggest we saw on Saturday. Then you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But not a hair on your head shall be lost. And again, people die, but he says not a hair on your head will be lost. And I suggest that means if you know the Lord and someone kills you, you are not lost. By your patience possess your souls. And I believe, and probably, most of you have heard different sermons and all this, you've seen the graphs and how the major earthquakes have just, in the last, 50, 100 years, have just shot up with amazing consistency. You see volcanoes all through the Ring of Fire. Places you don't even see volcanoes. Earthquakes that have never happened before. The famine and the pestilence, there's diseases that never existed before. And there are some who say, Monsanto or whoever, invented them. Okay, whatever. He doesn't say yes or no to that. He just says there's new things that will be happening. And there's all of these things that are going to be happening, but these are the beginning. When you see this, lift up your head because your redemption is near. So I want you to tie all of these things that we've understood for so long about, the end times and the things that are going to happen. Tie all those things that we're fairly familiar with to this idea that the Exodus generation is our model. Those things that happen to them will be happening to us, or my daughter's generation, or whoever it's going to be. But all these things are going to be happening simultaneously. So you don't need to just look at the traditional prophecy reports have always included, there's so many wars and there's all this pestilence and there's earthquake. And that's true. I mean, I think that's great proof that we are heading towards the end times. But I think we need to tie that to this concept of the Exodus generation being our die stamp or our marker or our model. Because all of those things are going to be happening simultaneously. And we can go into Ezekiel 37 and 38. Those things will be happening. And you see those things happening. Ezekiel 37, 38 is all these nations that are going to surround Jerusalem. And, it lists them off. But, of course, it was written thousands of years ago, so it didn't use the names today. It used the names back then. So they seem odd to us, but if you go back and find out who these people are, it's Turkey, it's Iraq, it's Iran, it's Russia, it's most of Black Africa. And there are countries in this list that are not going to be involved in the actual war part. And oddly, those countries are Sudan, the United Arab Emirates, or not Sudan, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait. There's a section of land and of course Jordan, who won't be involved in the actual shooting part of the war. And those are the countries today that are not. Yeah, they're not. I mean, they don't support Israel, but they're not going to attack them necessarily. And it's just interesting to see, because even a few years ago when Turkey was turning, west, they wanted to be part of NATO, and they wanted to, they took away the fez, and, they started dressing like Westerners and all that stuff. They wanted desperately to be Western. And that was always a huge stumbling block to the prophecy buffs, because Turkey's like one of the main characters. And Turkey was Western. How could that? Well, now, of course, Turkey has turned back to its Muslim roots and, turned away from the things of the West and obviously from the things of the Lord. And all of a sudden, okay, those things could happen. So you can tie all these things in Luke and Matthew to all these things in Exodus to all these things in Ezekiel. And you see they're all coming, this flower is about ready to bud. Well, what Luke just said is, when you see these things beginning, look up, for your redemption is near. Well, I'm telling you, I see these things beginning. So you need to know, we need to know, I need to know the Lord in the way that He wants me to know Him. And I think a Sabbath service is not too big an obstacle. I mean, it seems like such a minor thing, but it was a big deal. It was a big deal to the Lord. He said, this is a sign between you and me. Okay, well, I'm down with that. I'd like to see a sign between Him and I. I would like to be as sure as I can possibly be that when I look up, because my redemption is near, I am in fact redeemed. And I am not one of these people who said, but we had Bible studies and great food and great music all the time. And hear him say, I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're teaching. You know, I don't want that. I would much rather, okay. So let's get back to the lesson and back up a bit and go to Exodus chapter 3. And this is we talked about all this stuff in the Exodus generation. We've talked about them in the desert, in the wilderness, in the midbar, in the teaching. And that's, again, the word is midbar. It's translated in English as wilderness. But the word is teaching, lesson. And that is exactly what Paul said in 1 Corinthians. That is our teaching. That's our lesson. That group of people is whom we need to look to see what's going on. So, to that end, let's back up to the beginning of that story in Exodus chapter 3, starting in verse 11. And Moses said unto the Lord, and this is, you remember, Moses cruising around in the desert, watching some sheep, sees a bush burning but not being consumed, heads over there to see what the story is. And Moses said unto God, who am I that I should go unto Pharaoh, and that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt? And he said, certainly I will be with you. This is a token unto thee that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God upon this mountain. And Moses said unto God, behold, when I come to the children of Israel, they shall say, the God of your fathers has sent me unto you, and they shall say unto me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And does that strike you as odd? Moses is, when they ask me who sent me, well, who should I say sent me? That seems weird. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am, he said. And thus you say unto the children of the Lord, I am, hath sent me to you. This might be too far out there, I don't know, but I would suggest to you, had Moses actually known, he wouldn't have asked that question. He didn't know God. He knew about God. And you think, oh, that's crazy talk. But how would he know God? Because his parents didn't teach him. As soon as he was born, well, some months later, they put him in an ark, sent him down the river. He was raised by the house of the Pharaoh. He was taught all the learning of the Pharaoh for 40 years. Certainly he knew about God. He thought, he knew enough to know, he thought he was the guy that was going to bring his people out of Egypt. And yet he goes out there and something doesn't go the way he thought it would go. And he's like, oh my gosh, I can't, So he runs away for 40 years. 40 years later, so who knows what he learned out there in the desert for 40 years. How would he know who the true God is? He would have zero experience with him until he sees the burning bush. Well, who should I say sent me? Because I think it was a legitimate question. He didn't really know. And he said, I am that I am. And we've looked at that word before. I think, are we going to look at it again? The Hayah thing? Yes, we are. Hayah is the word that means to be. And if you were, or if you are to be, those are variations of the word Hayah. You take all of those variations and you get what we call the tetragrammaton. That's what he says. I am that I am always. I am before, I am now, I am in the future. The things that happen in the future are happening right now in my sight. The things that happened in the past are happening right now to me. I am that I am. I've been, I will always be. There is no past, present, and future. I am that guy. That's who sent you. I am all things to all people. I'm the guy. I'm not some golden calf. I'm not a statue with 3 heads. I'm not any of those things. I am everything. I am always. I am what I am. And that's the basic meaning of Yahweh. Yahweh, if you pronounce it, it comes out Yahovah. But the contraction from Hayah is this picture, and it's hard. I'm certainly not doing a very good job. It's hard to explain in English because there is no English for this. God is always. The things that happened in the past are happening right now. The things that happen in the future are happening right now. The things that are happening right now are happening right now. He is all those things. So who sent me? Yeah, I'm the guy who is the past, present, and future. I inhabit all time forever. I'm that guy. So tell him that's the guy who sent you. And he will come to know him that way. And we'll read about some of the other things that sort of back that up. So going down to verse 15, and God said moreover to Moses, thus you shall say unto the children of Israel, that the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me unto you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations. I am that I am. Okay. So again, I'm trying to make the point that that generation from Moses on knew about God but did not know God. And God was about to change that. He did these things, again, for this, he says it countless times, that you shall know I am the Lord. And in our lives, cool stuff happens. The Lord is with us all the time. Just the other day I had, however many blinds it was. Each blind takes 4 screws. I reached into the bag, grabbed a handful of screws, put them in my pocket. As it turns out, I needed 154 screws. How many screws did I have? 154. Okay, so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that's just, that's God. He throws me a bone every now and again. Well, I don't think that that's necessarily, sure, it's probably God. I don't think necessarily that's what he's talking about here. He does stuff for us because he loves us, right? He has mercy and grace and all that. But there's a way that I suggest we are going to come to know him that perhaps we haven't even considered before. And that's why he says, look to the Exodus generation, because they saw things that no one had ever seen before. They did things that no one had ever done before. They saw God in a way that no one had ever seen God before. And as far as I can determine, it didn't affect them. It didn't change their lives so that they desired to know him. They continued to complain. And that's why I think when he says the complainers died in the wilderness, it's so important to recognize that that's a bad thing. Don't be complaining because things aren't going the way you thought. Who are you? Who cares what you think? God doesn't care what you think. He's picked you to use you for a purpose, and that purpose is so that the heathen will know that he is the Lord. And if you're out there complaining about all the stuff the Lord has done, I suggest that's not what he would have you to do.
I think most of the world believes that God owes us something.
Right, exactly.
That's a scary thought right there.
It is a terrible thought.
People go, why God, why God?
Yeah, well, yeah, I do every day.
That's blasphemy in my book.
Yeah, it is. It's exactly the opposite of what God wants us to do.
Exactly.
He wants us to live in the way, and again, how do we get to that point? We live in the way that he prescribed. He said, and we think, oh, the law and the rules, and we got to do all that. Oh, no, you don't have to do it. As evidenced by everyone sitting in this room and everyone we know and have ever known, he does not smite you if you don't do it. The penalty is later on. You don't have to do it, but if you want to, I suggest it. Obviously, your life becomes easier, or certainly less. Easier is not the right word. It doesn't necessarily remove any of the events of the world that will, cause us pain, but it becomes easier in the sense that,
Enlightenment maybe comes your way.
yeah, we're not.
If you're following
We're
what
not
you're doing what he
focused on
wants.
the things that we look at all the things that happen in the world, and it's so easy for so many people to get so focused on it, they forget the Lord. Well, that's not good, And so if we were to make an effort to live in the way that he prescribed for us to live, I suggest he would give us new eyes to see the things that are going on, certainly in our lives, but in the world, and it would be simpler. because we wouldn't carry the burdens of the pain, right? But anyway, and we don't do it. And they're simple things.
They're easy.
They're dumb things, And it's not that, not eating pork is going to save you. Not eating pork might be good for your heart, but it doesn't save you. It's just you get in the habit of doing what the Lord asks you to do, right? If you worship on Saturday instead of Sunday, you're getting in the habit. If you, quit doing some of the things that He asks or start doing some of the things that He asks, you're just getting in the habit of doing things for the Lord. And I think that draws you closer to the Lord, and that puts you in that spot where you might actually know the Lord in the way He's asking you to know Him. And if I'm wrong, the worst possible case is, you've lived a good life.
I have one that we could all do, I read it just the other day, is do not place a stumbling block in front of
Yes.
a blind man.
Yeah,
I think I could do that.
I think I could. But we do that all the time. And I, again, married to the vein, I suggest that by, being okay with the pagan celebrations instead of His celebrations, and by being okay with all this stuff, that is throwing a stumbling block, because you've made it easy for everybody to go, I don't need to do the things of the Lord. Everybody worships on Sunday.
I was thinking literally.
I know, and literally is good too. Don't do that. But I think that's the picture, right? You're throwing a stumbling block out there, and people don't care. Oh, I know the Lord said don't eat pork, but everybody, and bacon's great. I know the Lord said worship on Saturday, but nobody I know does that. I know the Lord said give your enemy a water, but it's just easier to yell at him in a restaurant and throw him out of the. That's a stumbling block. Okay, Exodus 5, verses 1 and 2. It said, so afterward, Moses and Aaron went in and told the Pharaoh, this is good, told the Pharaoh, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that we may hold a feast, they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, who is this Lord, or who is Yahweh, that I should obey His voice and let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. So, again, Egypt is the world. The people are in bondage to the world. So, the king of the world, the Pharaoh of Egypt, read this, the politicians of your favorite party or whoever makes all the rules for you, they say the same thing. Who is this Yahweh that I should obey Him? I'm the president. I'm the governor. I'm your senator. I'll make the rules. You'll do what I tell you to do. Okay. Didn't work out so well for the Pharaoh. But that's what he thought. Who is this Yahweh that I should obey Him? I'm the Pharaoh. I'm God, not this guy. And God will show you, or them, that He is God. And I suspect we will see this, or probably we're beginning to see it. The first thing that has to happen is you have to get everyone in agreement that God is not God, and I think pretty much every president who's ever been, in the last 150 years, every senator, every congressman, every mayor, there aren't very many that recognize God as the lawmaker. They believe themselves to be the lawmakers. Just like we talked about last week about they want to take our money so they can distribute it to the people they think are poor, instead of letting us do what God asks us to do, which is to take care of the poor in our neighborhood, right? To take care of those that need help. And the government doesn't want us to do that. And, there's a million different things, and they're all saying the same thing the Pharaoh did. Well, who is this Yahweh that I should obey Him? I don't know who He is. And God will make Himself known to them. And it may be too late.
But doesn't God put the president into office?
He allows us to prick the president, yeah. And He will, He's used Nebuchadnezzar and the Pharaoh and the Caesars in various ways to fulfill the things that He wants us to do, but He's in no way saying, oh yeah, that's the guy. He's basically letting us pick the people that we want to pick.
It's kind of like the story in the Bible of God said, you have me, and they said, no, we want a worldly person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, why would we do that? You know, and the founding fathers recognized that the Lord was the Lord, you know, and that he was the guy who made the rules, and that's basically how they came to the Constitution that we have. And everybody since then has pretty much been determined to destroy all that and to change that because they don't believe the Lord is the Lord. They're the people who get to make the rules. You know, Feinstein, oh, if you're a Christian, you should be barred from public office. You're unable to make an intelligent decision. I'm unable to make a decision that you would agree with, but I will agree with the Lord on just about everything. Yeah, so anyway, let's move on because we're pretty much out of time. Okay, verse 6. And the Pharaoh commanded the same day the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, And you shall no more give the people straw to make brick. As heretofore, let them go and gather their own straw for themselves, and the tale of bricks which they make heretofore you shall lay upon them shall not diminish aught thereof, for they be idle. Therefore they cry, saying, you know, blah blah blah. And that's exactly where the world is today. The leaders and the lawmakers do not know the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They pass all these laws that they know we cannot, you know, if you follow the Lord, they know we can't do that. The Lord said, you know, do not kill. So okay, let's pass laws that we kill all our kids. Lord said, do not be homosexual because you can't create life. So let's make it okay for everybody to be homosexual. I mean, everything about it, you know, man should do this and a woman should do, no. Let's put the woman in man's clothes and the man in woman's clothes. Let's feminize the man and manlyize the woman, you know. Everything that the Lord says, the world says the exact opposite on purpose, right? So that's what was going on here. The Pharaoh is saying, I'm God. So now, go get your own straw. That's just a picture of the government putting the people who follow God in a spot where they can't do it. They just cannot follow the directions of, so what happens? Well, I suggest...
You move to Israel.
Well, and don't think it's any better in Israel. You know, it's another secular state, but, you know, but anyway, we will get to Israel. But I'm just saying, you know, everything that, and I've said this 100 times, everything you see on TV, everything you hear, everything the politicians do, everything the milkman does, I mean, it's all designed to take you away from whatever the Lord wants you to do. So that should be proof positive that we need to abandon the things of the world and follow after the Lord, because it's so obvious the world is all about, it's the only thing it's about taking you away from the Lord. You know, it's crazy you can't even make this stuff up. Oh, I know, let's convince women to kill their own babies. Nobody's going to do that. And yet, they do it. Let's convince guys to, you know, be with other guys, and girls to be with other girls. You know, it's like, I've seen the girls and the guys. Who would want the other one? You know, they don't even fit together. It's just craziness. And then people buy into it. And all of this stuff that they sell you, is if you just lay it on the table, it's crazy. There'd be no way the best salesman on earth could sell this stuff. And yet, they do. And people buy it. And I don't know why. Well, I mean, I do know why, because this is
The opposition.
why. Yeah, it's true. So anyway, let's pick this up next week, I guess, in verse 21.